Thanks for joining us for this 1 hour session on MPs' votes, why they're important, and most excitingly, how we've improved our publication of information on TheyWorkForYou. At My Society, we create and run digital services to break down barriers to democratic participation, and we aim to equip people to take action and drive meaningful change. We use a combination of digital expertise and human-centered design approaches to deliver open, usable services that enable people to inform themselves, take part in decision-making, and improve their lives and communities. Now, TheyWorkForYou is one of our longest running and best-known services. Now covers the UK's devolved parliaments alongside Westminster, and MP voting records are perhaps the part of TheyWorkForYou that has the biggest impact on the wider political conversation. So we're very happy to be launching this update at a time when such key issues are being debated and ultimately decided on in those parliaments. So a little bit about the running order today. We're going to kick off with Julia Cushion, My Society's Policy and Advocacy Manager. Julia is going to give us a potted history of TheyWorkForYou and the ways in which we use it to improve practice in Parliament by showing an example of how things can be better. Then I'm extremely delighted that we're joined today by Ben Worthy. Ben's a reader in public policy based at Birkbeck College. He studied access to information, open data and transparency in the UK and elsewhere, and is author of The Politics of Freedom of Information, How and Why Governments Pass Laws That Threaten Their Power. He's also completed a 2-year Leverhulme Trust project looking at the impact of TheyWorkForYou, and you can find out more about that by going to who'swatchingwestminster.wordpress.com. And Ben's going to tell us all about why we should care about MPs' voting records and whether watching MPs actually improves their behaviour. Finally, we have Alex Parsons, who leads My Society's democracy practice. He's going to talk about the problems with the information that Parliament releases on votes, how we've addressed those problems in our latest version, and what the work is that still needs to be done. And then it's going to be over to you for questions, so do enter your questions as you think of them below the video. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Julia to let her set the scene. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you so much, Louise. I will just share my slides, which you should be able to see now. And I'm also going to spotlight myself so you can see me. Great, hopefully that is working for everyone. So I'm setting the scene a little bit today by talking about why we publish voting information and the sort of thinking that we have done going into it and the way that it has changed over the 20 years that TheyWorkForYou has existed. So it is nice to start with a little bit of history. On the right here, you see a picture of Sir Francis Winnington, who in the late 17th century said, "It is not national nor rational that the people who sent us hither should not be informed of our actions." And that basic principle is the one that guides TheyWorkForYou, making sure that people are aware of the voting behaviours of the politicians that they elected. And it's worth kind of considering what we're doing in a bit of context here, because there's a nice fact that it was after the Great Fire in 1834 that MPs finally agreed to have a second division lobby built, so that actually there were distinct voting lists between the ayes and the noes, and that you could ascertain how your MP had voted. Until then, it was just the job of individual MPs who tried their very best to make lists and then provided them to newspapers, but they weren't accurate. And so yes, Parliament has a long history of changing what and how it communicates about votes, and we are just a little part of that history trying to nudge it forwards. So that basic premise is this: it should be easy to see how your MP has voted. And it's worth saying not just your MP, your other representatives too. TheyWorkForYou does cover the devolved parliaments from across the UK as well as the Westminster Parliament. But although it should be easy, it is worth saying that we recognise that voting and how Parliament works and what a vote means is complicated. So we do put a lot of thought into how we display that information and how we communicate it. And our thinking of it has changed over time, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. We take two approaches, which are briefly, we try to provide more information, voting information, than Parliament does at source by reworking parliamentary data and by making summaries that are easy to understand and engage with. And then also, as well as trying to make that complicated information simpler by displaying it in different ways, we argue for the information to be simpler to begin with. The processes of voting and how Parliament publishes its own voting data could be simpler to begin with. So I'm going to cover both of these in my quick 10 minutes, starting first with providing more voting information. Again, a little bit of history here. I've got two screenshots on the slide showing in the top right-hand corner Parliament's website in 2005, and in the bottom right-hand corner They Work For You in 2005. And just recognising that back in 2005, you could see your MP's email if they had one. You can see there quite a few didn't. Their personal independent website if they had one, and their biography on Dodds, but there wasn't the same way of having an individual MP page and looking at your MP's voting record. Whereas They Work For You, with help from the Public Whip, was making that available back in 2005. And some of these things have stayed the same. So that back then we were publishing voting records and linking to the relevant votes as we do now. And yeah, I wanted to touch on this relationship with Parliament where we are trying to encourage them to move forward. Back in 2005, we were breaking copyright by publishing this information in this way, but it ultimately led to new forms of licensing. So more tools and projects were legal and available. And that's very much the spirit that we still operate in, and the spirit of this event today, which is to say we're producing more voting information than ever. Alex is going to cover that. And not only is it improving They Work For You and the information we provide on there, but it's making available the opportunity to make other tools and resources. And maybe there's people on this call who will do lots of interesting things with the data as well. But that's Alex's role, so I'll leave that to him later. And yeah, obviously, as Louise mentioned in the introduction, a really prominent part of They Work For You is our work in summarising votes, in producing these voting record summaries, where we say if MPs voted consistently one way or the other, or sometimes voted a certain way. And here, just to sort of talk briefly about our approach, we think it's really important to try to be both clear and accurate. And we want to make something that's simple and easy to understand if you're not an expert in how Parliament works, but always providing links to more source data and more opportunities to explore if you'd like to. But it's worth saying that we do recognise that people are busy and they may not always explore the source data. And so it's really important to us to get these summaries as accurate and clear as possible. And make clear why we choose the things that we do and the process that we go through to do those. And so you'll always find links to giving feedback and to understanding more on They Work For You. And yes, as I've already mentioned, today we're having this event because we're launching They Work For You votes, and we're making even more of the source data available, but I will leave that to Alex later. So as well as the work that we do to make it easier to understand how your MP has voted and to summarise those votes, as I mentioned, we also do some work behind the scenes trying to argue for improvements to voting processes. So there's taking complicated information and trying to make it a bit simpler, but there's also trying to simplify it at source. So here our principle is that it should be easier for MPs to vote in the first place and for everybody to understand those votes. And here we're also balancing processes that create transparency, but we're also really concerned and sensitive to the circumstances of representatives' lives, what it is like to be an MP, the job of an MP, and how the working conditions of MPs are changed by how voting changes. So we believe that the House of Commons should defer votes to a standardised voting time where you can have multiple votes quickly in succession through electronic means. At the moment, each division has 8 minutes attached to MPs being allowed to walk through either lobby, but on average a vote takes somewhere between 12 and 18 minutes, and so it's a long part of the parliamentary day that it takes for an MP to vote. The current proxy voting schemes are mostly controlled by the whips, and we believe that they should be extended more so to MPs' personal discretions. They should have more charge over those things. And also, alongside the physical process of voting, talking about the data that Parliament publishes, Alex will talk a bit towards our steps towards a motions database, but Parliament could itself maintain and publish a database of motions to make this all much clearer. And also Keeling schedules, which is a kind of track changes on legislation. So you'd be able to see much more clearly what an individual amendment was doing to the legislation. And finally, a key part of They Work For You is that we publish MPs' votes within the context of their party, and so we say how they compare to their party. But we always have argued that voting instructions given to MPs, the whipping instructions, should be made public. Sometimes this is talked about like it's obvious, but I think for lots of people it's not obvious, and so I think there's a lot to be gained from that. Before I hand over to Ben, I just wanted to recognise, as we said at the beginning, that we try to take a really thoughtful approach to voting information, because what an individual vote means is complicated. And again, looking to the history, how we have talked about votes has changed over time. We know that when you start highlighting aspects of behaviour, this does change behaviour, and Ben is going to go into a lot more detail about this. But a few things that we have noticed and sort of changed over time and tried to adapt towards. Back in the early days, we were publishing statistics based on how regularly MPs intervened in debates, but notice this top screenshot is an example from the Times, that MPs started talking really briefly to try to up their rankings, and so those kind of comparisons we've removed over times. In general, rankings about and like kind of league tables of MPs isn't something that we publish anymore. The comparisons that we do publish are within parties, and also the types of votes that are included in our voting record summaries have changed. So this bottom right-hand screenshot is from a report that we published last year of some of the changes that we made to votes to make sure they were focusing on votes that have parliamentary impact. And so, for example, we no longer include opposition day votes as part of our voting record summaries. So yes, to say that very much the through line has carried out throughout TheyWorkForYou's history, which is we want people to be able to see and easily understand how their MP has voted, but we are acknowledge the impact that our work has, and we're trying to monitor and make that as successful and helpful as possible. So it's changed between 2005 and 2025, but yeah, we hope in positive ways. And the way that we try to find out whether what we're doing is working and having the impact that we'd like is by asking for feedback, which you'll see us ask for all over our websites, and we really do mean it. Not only just in general are they helpful, but for things that are really important that we get right, things like the voting records and what gets included and how they get aligned. We have a form you can fill out to tell us if you think new votes should be added, or if you have any thoughts or concerns with our current ones. The final thing to say before I pass over, because we are a charity now, it's kind of my job to say it, is that one of the constraints for us making TheyWorkForYou as successful as possible is funding. It's something that we're always looking for to improve our service. So just in case someone's watching and would like to fund TheyWorkForYou, has great ideas about how we can improve it, we would always love to have that conversation. So yeah, thank you for listening to our little potted history about TheyWorkForYou. Please do put questions in under the video on the page. And now I'm handing over to Ben. So I will stop sharing my slides and take myself.
Thanks.
Over to you, Ben.
Thanks so much, Julia. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for asking me along here. My name is Ben Worthy. I'm an academic based at Birkbeck College, University of London. And along with Stephanie and Kat, I did this 2-year project, as Louise said, funded by the Leverhulme Trust, that looked at the different platforms that people could use to watch what politicians were doing. And obviously, TheyWorkForYou was at the centre of it. So what we asked with our research was 3 questions. Who's actually using these sites, and how are they using them? What are they doing with the data here? And then finally, probably the most important and interesting part is, what impact is it having? And we were interested in the impact not just on the MPs who are under observation, but actually on the people who are doing the watching. So I just want to go through each of these kind of questions in turn. And just to let you know, we used a whole series of methods to try and work this out. We looked at reporting in the national, regional, local press. We had case studies. We got some great data from TheyWorkForYou itself. And perhaps most interestingly, we did a YouGov poll of 100 MPs to ask them what they thought about TheyWorkForYou. When we look at the first question about who's watching and using this data from TheyWorkForYou, a lot of them would be what you'd call the kind of usual suspects, the people you'd expect to be using the site. So journalists, not just national journalists, but also investigative journalists, regional journalists, and local journalists. You've got activists, campaigners, and that was both campaigners on particular issues related to certain votes, but also transparency campaigners more generally, and of course lobbyists and other bodies. But laid on top of this were some slightly more unexpected users, you'd say. Academics made quite a lot of use of this data and did all sorts of interesting things with voting data. And we actually found, based on data from TheyWorkForYou, that 2% of all the hits on the site come from the House of Commons itself. And that amounts to kind of 6,000 hits a month on the site. MPs use the data in two ways. Firstly, they use it to look at themselves and see how they're doing. That was actually much more important in the earlier days, as Julia said, when actually MPs were ranked according to attendance and work. But of course, the other way in which they use it is for ammunition to criticize other politicians, something which I want to return to. How about the public? Well, actually, compared with lots of the other platforms, TheyWorkForYou is very heavily used. And interestingly, their survey data shows that around 1 in 5 users were people who say they're not particularly interested in politics and come upon the site through a series of kind of different routes. And that's really positive for political engagement. In terms of how it's being used, well, there's a couple of different interesting ways. Of course, the national press report important votes and how MPs voted. What we found even more interesting is that the region, the local press often pick up data and give it a local spin. How did your local MP vote on this issue? And you're probably very familiar with these little postcode finders, which are now a regular feature of important parliamentary votes, where you put in your postcode and find out how your local MP voted. More interestingly, it's not just about what's happened, but about what can happen in the future. And we found there's a use of TheyWorkForYou to try and predict what MPs might do in future votes. Here's some really interesting analysis ahead of the last assisted suicide vote, where actually MPs were analysed for not just their past voting records, but also their publicly stated stances. So that this campaign group attempted to guess what might happen with the vote. It also links to all sorts of other interesting innovations. We found links between voting records and e-petitions. Also, as you can see, these GIFs and memes that are created in the wake of votes, and things like a scorecard for MPs to see how they've performed. I just want to qualify this by saying these scorecards are very much not objective and often created by political parties or campaigners. And here's a great example from Extinction Rebellion, who used voting records to put up these kind of fake blue plaques on MPs' offices for those MPs who voted against the greater regulation of the water industry and the greater regulation of the dumping of sewage. So far, so good with the public. You can see that it's heavily used and that people find out about it not just directly by using it, but also indirectly through the media. Then we get the interesting question of MPs and how they use it. Now, at first glance, it looks like when we asked 100 MPs, it's split roughly evenly between MPs who thought that it had a positive effect, TheyWorkForYou, those who thought it had no effect, and those who thought it had a negative effect. But when we dug into the data, it got rather more interesting. The top line here is all MPs, but the other two lines underneath are Conservative MPs, who at the time were in government, and Labour MPs on the bottom, who at the time were in opposition. And as you can see, there's a pretty distinct difference in terms of levels of enthusiasm for TheyWorkForYou. The reason for this is twofold, really. First, Conservative MPs were much more the target as government MPs of TheyWorkForYou, so felt less positive towards it. And Labour MPs were more enthusiastic, probably because they were using it a great deal more against government MPs at the time. We'd be fascinated to run this again to see if those attitudes are reversed. We also found there's lots of other interesting kind of distinctions and nuances within the data, depending how old the MP was as to what they thought the effect of TheyWorkForYou was, and also the seat safety, which is the same kind of proxy. The safer a seat, the less concerned an MP was by TheyWorkForYou. There was also, unsurprisingly, a big gender difference, because we know female MPs are much more closely scrutinised generally than male MPs. What we found overall was actually sites like TheyWorkForYou do make MPs more accountable. They feel the pressure and they do something very positive in democratic terms, which is spend a lot more time explaining what it is they're doing in Parliament. You can see these kind of posters and GIFs that they create themselves to tell people why they voted a certain way, what they've been doing at Westminster. We also found that MPs are behaving better in various other ways. We've found a few MPs around the time of the second jobs discussion self-reporting that they had accidentally breached codes of conduct. We also found big spikes whenever there was a controversy over a register of interest of other MPs registering as many interests as they could when they saw an MP getting into trouble about it. And also, more generally, the discussion around voting, around registers of interest, around all these other things has helped apply pressure, which has then led in turn to the kind of ongoing reform around MPs and the Code of Conduct at Parliament. Now, I've talked a great deal about the House of Commons and not at all about the House of Lords. There's a particular reason for this. Essentially, there is much less interest in the House of Lords. There's very little interest in House of Lords in terms of votes, unless A, something very controversial takes place, or B, the House of Lords is very much opposed to the House of Commons on an important issue. Actually, when the data was looked at in the House of Lords, it was normally data around attendance and allowances rather than voting records. And of course, the discussion around peers, how often they attend, whether they claim the allowance, kind of plays to ongoing narratives around the House of Lords and to what extent it is a working body or not. And of course, as Julia hinted, there has been some resistance. We found very little evidence of gaming lately. The sense was a lot of the gaming or attempts to manipulate things came around the time when there was the rankings of MPs over things like attendance. There were, of course, complaints. There's complaints on record there from Hansard that data is used to misrepresent what it is MPs are doing. Robert Lagan, when he was MP, persuaded 49 of his colleagues to actually sign a letter complaining to My Society about how they represented particular votes. There was a controversial issue back in 2013 when the Sun newspaper published a series of lists about what they called lazy MPs. It then emerged that some of those MPs who had attended less than others had significant caring responsibilities. And actually, as a positive note, the Sun pulled the story afterwards. But before we while we acknowledge that MPs can make valid points about misrepresentation and what other people do with this data, remember MPs also enjoy using voting data in all sorts of interesting ways. Boris Johnson, you may remember, famously claimed Labour MPs had voted against the NHS budget bill when that vote never actually existed. And similarly, Labour also made great play about a missed vote on Heathrow that Boris Johnson skipped during the time he was Foreign Secretary. So just to conclude, we felt that actually these sites do make MPs and peers more accountable, particularly in how they explain what they're doing. It's led to some positive behaviour change. It has driven some resistance, but it isn't it's normally just at the margins and not on a large scale. I think the really important thing to remember is that sites like TheyWorkForYou help create a metric of what constitutes a good or bad politician. And it contributes to the picture in people's head about how politics works. And that's really, really important. And it also helps us inform the kind of narratives and stories that we tell about politics. If you want to find out more about this, please, as I said, go on to our WordPress blog, Who is Watching Parliament. You can download the report or an executive summary. I also wrote a blog summarising everything on My Society's blog site as part of their Repowering Democracy series. And just to round it all off, once we'd done this research, which we really enjoyed and thought had some really fascinating results, we've then done a study of the Westminster accounts, which you may know, a website that at the push of a button allows you to see MPs' registers of interests and donations like this. And just as a final thought, you'll be probably unsurprised to know that MPs are much less enthused by the idea of people looking through their donations and registered interests than they were about their voting record. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, Ben. We'll hand over to Alex now, who I'll just spotlight.
Sorry, I'm just clicking through Zoom to change the thing. Give me a second. Cool. Thank you for that, Ben. That was fantastic. So my laptop is currently struggling to give me the tab I want. Let's see if we can find it. So yes, I'm going to be talking about the new site we're launching, TheyWorkForYou Votes, and there we go. I can find it and then click through. So here is the new site we're launching today, TheyWorkForYou Votes, which is a new platform for presenting the voting information that is meant for anyone to use, but is also we've been designing to sort of for our own work to help us do better work on TheyWorkForYou and to be able to do better analysis. So our sort of initial requirements for this is we wanted better tools and information to help understand and create these voting summaries. We wanted to see as a glance more information about a range of votes and to be able to dive in and understand what those votes are about. We wanted more flexibility in number crunching and to be able to do both do and support more ad hoc analysis of votes. Part of this meant untangling some of our processes. We've gone through a slow process over the last few years of building new data flows and tools, migrating our existing approach into new systems. And the end result of that is TheyWorkForYou Votes or votes.theyworkforyou.com, a new annex that is useful in itself, but also a foundation for a range of work we're doing that we hope is useful for others too. So the basic bread and butter of what we do is display the results of a vote and calculate breakdowns by party and identify disagreements within parties. So here's the familiar dots. But what we're also adding is these basic breakdowns by party to say who was for and against the motion and sort of understand like divisions inside a party. We also have a searchable voting list that shows the how individual people voted, and also this this party alignment, which is in this case incredibly uninteresting because everyone voted exactly the same as everyone else in their party, but helps highlight rebels who will have a lower alignment with the party. So that's also sortable and searchable. But where we're going beyond this sort of analysis of the numbers is in generating analysis of parliamentary dynamics. So based on how votes are divided in a particular way, we put representatives to one of 8 common clusters reflecting who was proposing the particular vote, divisions among opposition parties, and levels of participation. And the purpose of this is to be able to very quickly get a sense of what the interesting votes are to look at and just generally understand at a glance when looking down a list what or the particularly interesting votes happening that day or month. We calculate these for all the new votes we know about. For House of Commons votes, these are calculated and published within minutes of the votes being published on the Commons voting website. The thing we're really doing that's different in this website is we put a lot of work into identifying what's actually been voted on. Often it's quite hard to work out the motion that relates to a vote. It's not always printed immediately before the vote in the Hansard, and it isn't directly linked to in the API data. So to do this, we've built a very complicated parser to identify things that look like motions and try and assign them to the right decision. Having the text of the motion makes it easier for us to understand and do analysis on the motion. So from this, we can link to basic descriptions of different vote types, like amendments, second readings, or and like the example here at the bottom, approving statutory instruments, and provide additional descriptions of how that particular vote fits into the parliamentary process. From here, what we can also do is something that a few people have asked over the years is to be able to see votes that are associated with a specific piece of legislation going through Parliament. So we now automatically tag votes that seem like they're related to the same bill to make it easier to find amendments or significant stages of a bill. I will say this is slightly temperamental at the moment because it depends how things are named and labeled, but it is better than nothing, and we're seeing how we can adapt it over time. So the biggest difference between TheyWorkForYou and other systems that are tracking votes is we don't just track votes. We also include decisions that are made without a vote, which are what we call agreements, and from this similarly linked to the relevant motion that was decided. We do this for a few reasons. It was practically a necessity when we were trying to assign motions to decisions to know about all the agreements, because to assign the right motion to the right decision, you have to understand which of all the decisions were being made. But also it's just useful to have a canonical reference for different parts of the parliamentary process. Often there's a high profile issue that can be passed without a vote, and people go looking for the vote and they can't find it. And that, of course, is confusion. Am I in the right place? So by having a canonical link where we can sort of talk about here is the decision that was made, here's how that links to the legislation, here's how that links to the motion, we can show more about how the parliamentary process works and can tag them as part of the process of passing legislation. In rare cases, we're also including these in voting summaries. We did this, for instance, respectively on the vote to set a net zero target in the UK and some on the standards committee votes. We're generally conservative on this because agreements can be hard to interpret. They might mean everyone was in support and so there was no opposition. But what they can also mean is where fundamentally it's known who would win the vote. And as Julia covered, voting can take quite a long time and so it's costly. And so agreements are a way of effectively everyone agreeing not to spend the time for a known outcome. So it can reflect both this is very important and everyone supports it, or it reflect actually this is not controversial, but also not widely seen as important. So by pulling these out, we want to shed a bit more light on how this aspect of Parliament works, because most decisions made, especially in terms of the internal movement around stuff, are made by this sort of consensus. A result of sort of what we've been doing behind the scenes is that TheyWorkForYou votes now powers the TheyWorkForYou voting summaries. So this is where we group related votes together to show a record on TheyWorkForYou. Building on last year's change to how we approach scoring and vote inclusion, this new technical approach gives us more flexibility in calculating voting summaries for different time periods. So we can now show an all-time and a this Parliament view, which means we can feel more comfortable putting more and more votes into this Parliament view, and they won't get swamped by older votes. At the same time as reflecting that the implication of votes can be long running and the record is not reset at each election. These voting summaries are currently complete up to the start of this year. We will do an update covering the first part of 2025 in June. And here is a part of the site that's currently incredibly boring, but I'd like in the long run to be the most interesting part. As Ben covered, an impact of TheyWorkForYou has been more public explanations by representatives of how they voted. We'd like to start recording this to make them more accessible to people viewing representatives' voting records. So divisions, agreements, and votes by individual representatives can be annotated with additional information or links. We can also record information about the party voting instructions when this becomes public. We'll be testing this out on specific votes, but our plan in the long run is to make this directly available to representatives to annotate their own votes. This will both add more information to TheyWorkForYou, but also create a general resource for finding out not only how people have voted, but why. So this is sort of one of the directions we want to take with this site. It's not just it's where can we build on the official information to give people more opportunities, to give representatives more opportunities to communicate and more people more chances to find out information that is relevant to these specific votes. One of the things we really want to do with this is make it a platform lots of people can build on. We're going to make more and more of the information accessible in TheyWorkForYou over time to reach our wider audience, but we want to raise the standard and ease of analysis of parliamentary data. So making the data not just available through an API, but as bulk downloads that make it easier for research and analysts to get the benefit of all the work we've done joining up this data without having to do it themselves. So as a side effect of how we're working with this data, you can now run SQL queries almost directly against the data we hold without having to iterate through APIs a lot. We'll be doing some guides on how to get the most out of the raw data we're publishing. But generally, the goal we want here is to sort of lower the bar to exploring voter information so that if you have a question that can be answered exploring it, it is easier to jump to how you answer that question rather than how do you deal with 5 or 6 different sources of data. So over the next few months, we're going to be testing that annotation feature, starting with the assisted die-in third reading, which as a free vote especially benefits from gathering statements from MPs about how they vote. We have a spreadsheet which we're sharing on social media where we're trying to capture statements from MPs stating their stances on this issue, so we can then re-annotate that vote and TheyWorkForYou votes with that information. We'll also be adding coverage of roughly called like statements and signatures. But the goal of this is to capture early day motions in Parliament in the same system in a way that's generalizable to other like lists of MPs, such as signing a petition or signing when a group of MPs sign a letter. We want to be able to, for a range of things that are effectively like MPs signaling, so these are often things that do not have direct practical implications, but our MPs signaling, I have a view on this stance, I am part of this group, and we want to help make an aid for campaigners in understanding MPs' interests, in MPs, MPs that are useful to talk to. Those are sort of the things that plans we're making to extend over the next few months, and results of that will appear in TheyWorkForYou and in our other service, the Local Intelligence Hub. Going beyond these are not currently funded projects, but what we would like to extend this further. The first aspect is devolved parliaments. We've currently included agreements and motions for the Scottish Parliament, in part because they publish a nice motions database, which is one of our recommendations for the UK Parliament, so the implementation was far easier. In principle, we want to try turning on the motion detector for the Senate, which might work fine, but it just needs to budget time for adaptations needed there. We don't currently cover votes in the Northern Ireland Assembly at all because the THeyWorkForYou scrapers do not extract the divisions from the transcript. This is something we can fix. Northern Ireland Assembly publishes lots of great data we can make use of. We need to do some additional work to properly display the results of cross-community votes. So here my thinking is to sort of where we can define a set of linked work we might be able to work with volunteers to make progress on. So just chipping away at the problems and getting all the information from different parliaments into this system. And one of the benefits of this is you can start to see like legislative consents on bills. So, for instance, there's one example in this, I can't remember, where the Scottish Parliament has given legislative consent to a bill. It appears in the same length, in the same list as the votes in the Commons. And so there's something to be said, like seeing the UK as a parliament with 5 chambers and being able to understand how things are flowing between all of these is helpful to understand. And the second bit is the House of Lords. For the moment, we are covering the votes in the House of Lords, but we're not currently extracting the motions or the agreements. I'd like to do more of that because it's interesting to understand like where do the changes that eventually make the bills come from. And especially one of the so we've built this very complicated system to extract the motions for what MPs are voting on. Sometimes what you get is we disagree with this Lord's Amendment 16. It'd be very nice to know what Lord's Amendment 16 was. Currently, these are published, they're not included in Hansard, they're sort of published in a set of PDFs of the amendments, papers moving between houses. Ideally, we think they should be published better, but I think we can work with what's there. And so here, what I'd like to do is wrap this up as a package of work, improving our ability to help understand and scrutinize the work of the House of Lords. So in general, this is a work in progress. There are forms all over the site to flag mistakes. In particular, the motion extractor, we've tested a bunch of stuff. There are going to be problems somewhere. If you see something that's wrong, hit the button. That helps us reflag it for the future. This is already a site that's powering TheyWorkForYou and powering what people are seeing every day. I want it to be, it's useful to us. I want it to be useful to other people. So if there are ways it can be more useful, let us know. And I think we are now able to move to questions, either for us about this or any of Ben's research.
Thank you so much, Alex. We have got some questions coming through. I think you have covered some of this in some of the work that you were just talking about, but one of the questions was, what are your next plans for TheyWorkForYou votes? Out of the things you've told us, is there anything you would particularly prioritize, or do you think that there are some dream things that you haven't mentioned that you would like to see one day?
So like the annotations bit is the bit I'm most keen on in the near future, because I think that's something where we can sort of demonstrate that it's useful from the outside, like gather more of this information in one place. And to an extent, we're looking, so in some of our work, we're like, we think Parliament can do this better. We want to demonstrate how. But also in other aspects, we're aware of where we can do things that Parliament can't because it's, it has lots of powers and resources, but also has constraints because it has to do a certain set of things in in neutral ways governed by how MPs want it to be run. And so from the outside, there are things we can do that are less easy to do inside Parliament. So stuff like annotations is where we see that being a key thing. Similarly, on the we'd like, as you sort of said at the start, we'd like information about the whips to be published. I am curious to the extent to which we can systemize leaking it. So that's some of the things I want to build towards is can we effectively make whipping information public without actually requiring things to be published from within Parliament itself. So those are like the steps we want to explore over the next few months is better working with representatives to see if they want to engage the system, how we can engage with the system and how we get, and when we start gathering this information, how we get it to people into TheyWorkForYou, into other systems to get the most from that information.
Yeah, really helpful, thanks. I think sometimes we get feedback that voting is just one part of what an MP does, or that it's nuanced, and I think we want to capture all of those things, and we want TheyWorkForYou to show those, and so yeah, absolutely great steps in that direction. Great, let's have a little look at some more questions. We've got another one here. How can I subscribe to hear more about votes topics that I care about? Is that still via TheyWorkForYou? Like we run the alerts, or is there now more information via the vote subsite? I guess that's a technical question for you, Alex, for people to hear more about this.
So We don't have any alerts directly off the TheyWorkForYou site. In principle, you could set up stuff with the API if you were technically able. But I guess the thing to say that's most relevant to that is next month we're going to be releasing another update to TheyWorkForYou, specifically looking at the email alerts and especially improving our keyword alerts functions to make it easier to find debates and votes on particular issues. So what I'd say is TheyWorkForYou is still the site for that, but we will be getting better at that pretty soon. So say subscribe to our newsletter for information about when there's new features launch.
Very good plug for subscribing. We'll make sure to include a link to subscribe to our newsletter in the follow-up email after this event, in case people aren't already. And here's a question. Maybe Louise, you could also want to come in on this. Having worked at my society for a long time, have you ever made changes to TheyWorkForYou platform based on direct feedback from a member of the Commons or Lords? Are you transparent about this? I know that the example that Ben mentioned, the Robert Largan one, we kind of like wrote a whole blog about this, made us think about certain things. And we hear from MPs and members of the House of Lords all the time in terms of updating their contact information and other parts of their kind of biography on TheyWorkForYou. But yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to come in on that, Alex or Louise. Any changes or any direct feedback that we've had over the years?
I mean, I think lots of the direct feedback has been in the public domain. So one that sticks in my mind was, again, on the subject of absences from votes, feedback from women who are MPs that their absence when they were having babies was not well represented when they were on maternity leave. And I think in that case, it is also the parliamentary system, which was very out of date in that there was no really good provision for that as a workplace. So I think in general, that has been a positive discussion, trying to move things forward in terms of the role of MPs and making it accessible to lots of different kinds of people, which is obviously really important. I can't think of a private piece of feedback that we acted on specifically about how we do things. No.
Absolutely. The My Society TheyWorkForYou blog is a treasure trove of all of the like decisions and changes and things that we've made over time and the communication we've had. We've got a question here. If any serious lie or foul play is uncovered, do you liaise with other organisations such as Full Fact or Hope Not Hate? I wouldn't say lies or foul play is something that really comes into TheyWorkForYou in terms of votes, because it is a record of how people have voted. But I didn't know if anyone had any thoughts on that.
Just that it's incredibly useful when trying to understand for the voting summaries what's going on with these. Looking for organisations who have already done summaries. That we tend to be a bit behind doing the voting summaries, as like we have like a 6-month period at the moment. And partly why that's useful is other people have had time to write detailed explanation of what's going on with them. So we're very much building on the work of other organisations when we come to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. We take seriously and think carefully about what each vote means in policy terms. And so, as Alex is saying, yeah, the work of other organisations helps us there. Alex, a question maybe for you. How does the clustering part of TheyWorkForYou votes work?
Well, I can also take the vote motion off the House of Lords quickly, because that's a technical question. Yes, it does. They're better than the Commons on that. We're not currently using that information, but it's available. It's the ping pong between the houses that's a bit unclear, but definitely the House of Lords has better publication on the amendments. The clustering is basically what we wanted was a shorthand that worked across parliaments. So what we do is for each vote, we create 6 columns of percentages saying was the government did the government vote for, against, or was absent, and did opposition parties vote for, against, or absent? And so that sort of creates the cluster. That means throw all the votes we knew about up to that point, including the ones in the devolved parliament, to create a set of clusters and sort of roughly then work out what they were actually signifying. So the thing about the clustering process is it's kind of inherently arbitrary. We could have 20 if we wanted, but that just felt like a good stopping point. So basically how this currently works is when votes are loaded in, it compares them to the centers of those clusters and say what the best cluster is. And also, if it's roughly speaking a fit, but is a bit out, is an outlier, we sort of flag it as an outlier. So, for instance, the second reading of the recent assisted dying bill was a good one for this because it's a free vote. The parliamentary dynamics should be all over the place. The clusters shouldn't pick it up properly. And it goes, yeah, this looks like roughly like something the government's opposing, but the opposition's rejecting, but seems a bit weird, which is what you'd expect from a free vote. So we also have some ability to go in and then modify that directly, but it's in general sort of useful for us, like going down a column and going like low participation votes, interesting, what's that about? Or like these are the strong conflicts. And also just especially like what was the direction of the vote in terms of like, is this an opposition amendment being proposed? Is this a government amendment? So just it just helps us like at a glance to try to understand like what's happening that day in Parliament when we're going through like 20 votes at a time.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I wondered, maybe we'll give people a couple of minutes to add any more questions if they want, but Ben, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I guess it would be great to hear your reflections on some of the things that we've been talking about today, some of the stuff that Alex has been working on and talked to us through, any of the other questions or thoughts, changes since you've done your research, or yeah, any reflections.
Yeah, just a couple of things as everybody was speaking. Obviously, the complaint that this data is taken out of context is not a criticism of my society. It's a criticism about what people do with the information. And one of the things that jumped out really interestingly when we spoke with MPs is the idea that yes, this is objective data, but of course, different people with different agendas will use this in all sorts of ways. Another thing that was really important when we did our research is that actually there's a huge black hole of data about lots of the other things that MPs do. And remember that MPs are extraordinarily busy. They do a huge amount of work, almost all of them. They're working kind of 70, 80-hour weeks. So, for example, we have almost no data on what MPs do in their constituencies. We do know that over the past few decades, there has been a huge move for MPs doing a huge amount of work in their constituencies. And unless and until MPs publish data about what they do in their constituencies, how many surgeries they hold, what they do, we have no idea. So the complaint that, this data can be misunderstood, it's also, the only data we have about what MPs are doing, but I think we found one or two MPs who published the number of constituency surgeries they held. Apart from that, almost nothing. And also, I just want to flip on the head some of the complaints about that MPs have. So the letter from Robert Largan, which complained about my society, had 50 MPs sign it, which is astonishing. And a real tribute to how important they actually think TheyWorkForYou is. To get 50 backbench MPs to sign a letter is quite impressive. And it also tells a story about the way in which this kind of data has become a really important metric about how we understand what MPs do. And that's a thing to be kind of celebrated. And I think lots of the work that's happening here is actually helping fill out some of that context. A frequent complaint from MPs is there's no whipping data. People think that we do all these votes by our conscience, but that's not my society's fault. It's the fact that whipping is secret. But that would be a really important thing to know, because most MPs, most of the time, vote according to their whip, especially now when you've got so many new MPs as well.
Really helpful, thanks, Ben. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think in our dream world, we would show loads more. We want to be a site where people can find out about all of the different things that their MP does. But as you say, there's only so much data available. And I think some of this annotations and EDMs and other work that we're doing is trying to go some way to that. Great. We have a few more technical questions, and someone saying thank you. This is very interesting, which is very nice. Owen Blacker says hi. Hi, Owen. Thanks for watching. UI improvement features. I think any sort of feedback or features for TheyWorkForYou, support@theyworkforyou.com is a good email address to write to and tell us what you think.
Also, there's a big form on the website at the moment that sort of would triage it a bit better, but yeah.
Oh, great, cool. There's a big form, and maybe we'll include that in our follow-up email. Alex, I think some more questions from you. When amendments, typically those from small parties, are not selected by the speaker, is there a way you can indicate this to people looking at the votes which do take place? I know that, yeah, there's been votes and amendments recently that people were really trying to follow. And another great example of how confusing Parliament can be. And then combining that one, Alex, with any tracking of legislative consent motions to decisions in devolved legislatures would be very very interesting to the Commons Library. Nice to know that you're watching Commons Library. I'll hand those over to you, Alex.
Taking the legislative consent ones first. Yes, I think I've spotted a few in the Scottish Parliament. I'd like to see how that does with the motion detector, see if that's coming up and okay. So please get in touch if there's something specific that's useful to talk about there. And then if that's stabilising in the Scottish Parliament, sending that to the Senate and the Northern Ireland Assembly will be a nice thing to progress from there. So like I've seen a few of them, and this will be interesting to like keep tracking how that's going. On the smaller parties one, yes, this is an interesting one, like where a public discussion will sort of, again, sort of going back to the thing where like, if votes are the only thing that is visible, people's public conversation get a bit confused. It's like, well, I want to know what happened with this thing. And the answer is, well, it went nowhere, but there's no specific place you can go to for that. And this sort of again goes back to having a motions database where we sort of very clearly see like the road's not taken in terms of like there was this motion, there was this amendment proposed. It has a real link on a real website, and you can also see it wasn't discussed. So just being able to like highlight all those sort of paths not taken in terms of things that didn't need a vote or things that didn't get voted on just helps like anchor that wider discussion about how Parliament works. And they also just sort of say on the Ben's point about like information about what MPs do and the rest of that. Yeah, and this is sort of a thing we're sort of aware of when it's like talking about a vote slot, is like people think of They Work For You as the vote site, but probably like the They Work For You does a lot of other things, and especially the email alerts. And we'd like to like votes to be one of the things that we do as opposed to the main thing that people see us doing. And there's an interesting project I'd like to like explore a bit more, a UK project called DC Inbox. And this is an American academic who essentially subscribes to all the newsletters of House of Representatives, of representatives of the House of Representatives, and that publishes the results of that. And I think that'd be a really interesting sort of project, again, in like what people are choosing to communicate and what people are choosing to do locally. So like I'd like to sort of flesh out a bit what a UK version of that would look like, in the same sort of sense that what MPs do isn't just in Parliament, it's around the rest of the place, and where can we sort of make that more accessible, more communicatable. But yes, I think that was some of the questions, and I had an extra answer for fun.
Very fun answer. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Well, I think we maybe will wrap up in a minute. We have a few more minutes in case anybody wants to throw in a final question. Oh, okay. One more that I'm just going to approve in our little workflow. What would be the most helpful thing for They Work For You that Parliament could do with its data on votes? If you had to pick one thing that Parliament could do to make our lives easier, Alex, what would it be?
I mean, I'd definitely say having just spent all the time building the motions database, not having to do that would be great. And if they could retrospectively make that time pointless, it'd be fantastic. Just because it's a fairly horrible piece of code that has like it's got you have to account for lots of different edge cases to properly match the two. So having a system where in some way you could say this is a motion, this is where it was voted on. The Scottish Parliament effectively has this, that their motions database is linked to their votes database. There's some exceptions like when things get amended, but that would be the thing. In terms, we want to add value on top of what Parliament does. And so the more we can do things that Parliament can't do for various reasons, and the better Parliament does things, the resources it has, the more that helps us out. At the same time, as I sort of appreciate the reason we can do this is because we are able to pull in a slightly more free-form way between these different things without having to say this is an official system, this is how it all works. So it is easier for us to do some things, but at the same time, it would be better when it's done at the source.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice for us to have this opportunity to be like, here's a version of this, make an even better one, please. Yeah, and we really invite that for people to tell us what the things that are working and not working. Great. I think we can give everyone a few minutes of their lunch back. Any final comments or thoughts from the panel before we wrap up? I don't think so. Great. Well, we'll be sending an email around to everybody who registered on Eventbrite. Thank you so much for coming along to this. We really appreciate it. And yeah, please do stay tuned. Please do register for our Repowering Democracy newsletter, because that is where you'll find out all of the exciting things that we get up to. Thank you so much, everyone.